Good evening and welcome this evening to another program of Globespan24x7. I'm Charles Sugrim, and I want to thank all our viewers, of course, to our host, Mr. Noir Singh, and Devin, our technical specialist, for making this possible. Tonight in our program, we want to get away from politics a little and talk about something that is national importance. And for those of you who have been following the budget, you'd have known since in the 90s, as soon as the budget is presented, we look to the Stabroek News, the Sunday Stabroek News, to get what the budget has for you. That analysis is always done by Mr. Christopher Ram, so I was so honored today when he gave his consent to be on the program tonight. So Mr. Ram, welcome to the program.
Thanks very much.
And no stranger to us, Mr. Dhanraj Singh. He has had a program on Globespan. He's now doing some of his own program. He has been a consultant. He has been an economist. He has been everything in the world. He's now a board member of Guyana in this new administration. He also works in Florida with the county there. And you have so many things on your plate, Mr. Singh. So welcome to the program.
Thanks for having me, Sugrim.
All right, tonight, before we start, I want, on behalf of Globespan24x7 and all of our guests, we want to extend congratulations to our top scholars in Guyana, those who have been successful in the National Grade 6 Assessment Exam. Topping that list this year is Mr. Samuel Barcode and Robin Lal. So joint top students, we want to offer them our congratulations. Coming third was Mr. Alexander Singh. Then we had two-person tie for fourth, two students, Liana Darren Paul and Brandon Ramdin. And because there is two tie for fourth, there is no fifth, so the sixth, we had also three students tied for sixth. Brittany Peters, Gabriel Felix, and Danish Tularam. And then there is no seventh and eighth. So again, we had four students tied for ninth. That's Yuki Clark, Charisma Etwaru, Salma Bacchus, and Robert Forrester. So to all these students and to everyone who wrote this exam, despite the virus that we encounter, we want to offer congratulations. To those who did not do too well, don't give up. There is still a bright future for you. You'll go into different careers, go into different things in life, but don't give up because you did not pass the exam. So there is still a future for all of you students in Guyana. So again, congratulations to all our students. Gentlemen, before we start into the budget, I want to let us revisit the first, again, we have for Guyana, and I think all congratulations should also be laid to the President for having the Secretary of State visit. So gentlemen, before we start, what are your views of the visit of the Secretary of State, and what benefit do we expect from his visit? So Chris, we can start with you.
You know, not a lot was said about the visit by the Secretary of State, although we know that certain agreements were signed during his visit. A regular on this program, Ravi Dev, has always said that in diplomacy and in international relations, there's no such thing as permanent friends. There's permanent interests. And we have to bear in mind, that this was as much or probably more to serve the U.S. interests than to serve the Guyana interests. We need to get that clear. The highest ranking U.S. official, or the third highest ranking official, or probably the fourth.
I think the fourth, yes, maybe the fourth.
I can't speak on the phone now. Yes, I'm sorry about that. He came for Guyana's interest. Sorry, for the U.S. interest. There's no doubt that he played a big role in the struggle for democracy in Guyana. And maybe we have subsequently seen why it was that he was so active and vocal in relation to the question of the elections in Guyana. We must not also, and you guys are there, ignore the fact that in the United States, and he himself reached the Hatch Act when he spoke from Tel Aviv to the Republican convention in the United States. You've got President Donald Trump and the entire Republican Party are doing as best as they can to engage in voter suppression and to destroy democracy. Look at what's happening in the case of the death of Ms. Ginsburg. The woman had not died 2 hours than Trump and Mitch McConnell were talking about replacing her by a conservative judge, of course. So America is extremely hypocritical in its so-called embrace of democracy and what it wants for Guyana. You know, don't tell me with joint operations with Guyana. Which boat we joining with? Which boat are we putting out to carry out this joint operation? This is a US thing, chap. Let's understand that. Now, there are those who favor closer relationship with the United States. I believe the Caribbean ought to be a zone of peace. It's not anybody's backyard. And we must be careful. Obviously, the United States is very powerful. We don't antagonize it. We welcome it. We welcome the work that they did. But we also have to be very careful. We have to be careful about this question of oil. That, we will have a joint commission. Does that mean we stop talking about renegotiating the oil contract or holding a commission of inquiry into the 2016 contract, which may then lead inexorably to the review of that contract? But I'll stop for now.
Yeah, good point, Chris. Before you come on, just not to counter argue what you just said, but according to the Republican Party, they did clear up those things. You talk about the Hatch Act with the legal people, and they said there was nothing interfering with that report from Tel Aviv. As you said, there are permanent interests, not permanent friends. And we're in geopolitical environment where the Chinese is now vying for the world superpower, as we see what they're doing to Guyana right now as well. So I guess the Americans, we're in the backyard, they have to come in but we can, that's for another discussion, but we'll leave that there. But Dan, what is your view on the visit of the Secretary of State, and what have we achieved? What benefit are we getting from that?
Charles, thanks for having me on your program. To speak after Chris is a hard task and a tall order.
So I'll put you next first, don't worry.
No.
Yes, do that.
Look, here is the thing. I'm not going to dispute anything that Chris just said. Chris just have a long history, and he understands global politics. But I want to touch on a couple of different points at the same time. There is no question. The United States position on what is happening in Venezuela has never been a secret. It has not been a secret. And so nobody in the Caribbean or the Latin America region can say there is a secret agenda that has been disclosed. The U.S. has formally recognized Juan Guaido as the leader in Venezuela, and he has been very clear with what they want. Now, whether you agree with that position or not, it's a different thing. I'm not getting down that line. What I'm simply saying, there is no secret behind what where the US stands with Venezuela. So if anybody was sitting in their quiet seat and expect Venezuela situation to not come up in this meeting in Guyana, you clearly weren't following the news and following the issues in the region. So that's one. Two, Chris mentioned quite clearly that, you know, in international relations that, again, there's only permanent interests, not permanent friends. The question is, are those interests necessarily mutually beneficial or are they not? There is no, again, no two countries get into any discussion or agreement without wanting something out of that process. So again, that's the reality of it. The question is, are our interests aligned or are they not aligned? And that is something that we as a country are going to have to figure out as we go on, and to make sure, as Chris rightfully cautioned, to make sure you look at what exactly comes out of that visit and what the agreements are. But I want to make the point that the interests need not be differently aligned. And even if they are, we as a country might very well have to be careful in how we navigate those agreements to make sure that we're not getting involved in things that we can't, that was going to be detrimental to us. But I want to come back to the third, and let me go to a third point, which is, you know, a couple months late last year, I think we published a guide on oil and gas. And in that guide, we talk about the geopolitical context in the Caribbean. There is no question, when I think in 2008, Russia bought over Citgo from Venezuela, they have then acquired control of some of the largest reserves in the region. China has actively been in the region quietly in many Caribbean countries. As of a couple months ago, there was at least 5 refineries in the Caribbean that were up for sale, and the Chinese were actively bidding for them. So the point I'm making, there is no question that at the global level, China and Russia are trying to cement their position and influence in the region. Would the US allow that or not? Again, it's not secret. I think we can all sit down and whether we agree with the positions or not, to say that the US is not going to be in any way allowing that kind of consolidation of power in what Chris doesn't want it to be termed, that it's in their own backyard. But here's another point on that issue. Whether we like it or not, the Caribbean, including of Haiti, is about 15 million people. That's not even big like one of the states in the US, some of them. Yeah, some of them is smaller. But the point I'm making, economically, because of the region geography and the way the economies are fragmented, they do not muster a lot of economic power. And if you're sitting behind the back door of the largest economy in the world, yes, that means you are going to be, I don't want to use the word caught, but you're going to be involved. The global political strategies are going to be happening over your head. And how individual as countries carefully your policymakers can navigate that process to make sure you're benefiting from it is going to be dependent on the kinds and the quality of conversations we have at the domestic level. I'll leave it there for now, but I do think overall the visit made sense. It was good in the sense that Guyana is at the attention of the global economy right now. And what more of a spectacle did you want than to have one of the highest ranking officials in the US to visit the country? Again, what we do with that visit, what we do with this limelight, what we do with the opportunities is what will decide whether we benefit from these opportunities or not just the mere visit.
Great points. As Ravi mentioned, America will make Guyana great again. If ever we were great, I mean, but it says the right thing. It says that America will only go into a country where they have some interest. And now that we have oil, what was surprising to me, gentlemen, was when the question was asked by the foreign reporter about the oil, the president responded that he didn't mention oil because oil was not discussed. And I think, was that short-sighted, you think? Because, hey, that is hopefully our biggest income generation for the next 50 years. Why should we not discuss the oil contract with the Secretary of State, who have some clout and who will hopefully work with us to get a better contract? Chris, you want to go there?
I thought you promised Mr. Singh.
Okay, Mr. Singh, there you go. I was hoping the next question started budget will go to Mr. Singh, but
that's fine. Charles, look, I certainly can. I don't speak for the president, and I can't speak to what he knows from what he don't know. I wouldn't even speculate. But I'm going to take what he said on face value. If it is the fact that the government had not raised the issue of oil and gas and the Exxon deal, yes, naturally the question that is left for us is to speculate, which is why. Because you're right, this is a big issue for us. And clearly the way the government and the past administration has handled this issue was terrible. Now, whether it was short-sighted or not, I would not say that necessarily it is short-sighted, because here is what I do know. You have an active review that is going on a contract. And if you are going to involve external players right now to engage in this process, the question is, are we going to be paying any attention to what comes out of the review? Are we not going to paying attention to what is coming out of the review? I just think that it would have been, in my view, if with the new administration now taking office, you have a review that is going on, there is still several pieces of legislation that needs to be put in place to make sure you can regulate this industry properly. If anything should be discussed right now, is to make sure that you're seeking technical and expert advice on how to put certain legislation in place. But once again, I'm coming back to the point that you're in 2 months into the government, and you have all sorts of issues that you have to deal with, which is the COVID and getting a budget passed. So look, if I want to use a hard yardstick and say it was short-sighted, maybe not. But in my view, I don't think it's short-sighted, and I don't think also that the government would not at some point have that discussion with the U.S. They'll have to come to it somehow or the other. Whether the government bring the U.S. to the table or Exxon bring the U.S. to the table, the U.S. will be at the table. So it's a matter of timing.
Yeah, okay, Dan. But Chris, do you think that it was short-sighted for the government not to raise the Exxon contract with the secretary?
Well, I don't think short-sighted is the word. It's troubling. Well, listen, these things don't happen in a vacuum. When the Secretary of State, who hopefully will only be there for another 2 months, when he agreed to come here, and what did Guyana get of it? You love to talk law, Charles. Past consideration is no consideration. That was probably all. We got nothing more to get out of it. It's time for payback. And that's the problem I'm concerned about. I think there must have been a silent understanding that issue would not be publicly discussed. No one knows what was privately discussed, but you see, the PPP has been strangely silent, even in opposition. I don't know if it is because the PPP feels guilty about the 1999 agreement, if it feels guilty about the contracts, the oil contracts that were handed out a couple of days before the 2015 elections. Maybe all those things are at play. We do not know. What we do know, and I hope that Dan Raj agrees with me, if this Exxon agreement signed by Trotman stays in place, we are all the poorer for it. You could have as much oil as you can think, and Venezuela certainly does. But if it is not produced for the benefit of the people, then it is meaningless. As a matter of fact, it is counterproductive, because what is happening, Guyana is now a polluter country. It can no longer call itself a low carbon development strategy country. Let's be honest.
Yeah.
The 8 billion cubic meters or feet, I'm not quite sure, of flaring that we did, you know what's the consequence for the environment? And you guys in the United States, you should be very, very concerned. And you're talking about Pompeo, and you're talking about Trump, and they're telling you that climate change is a hoax. They are the hoaxes. So
all right.
we cannot ignore this talk. We cannot ignore dealing with this question of the oil contract. My view is, let us have a commission of inquiry with international people, and then you let the chips fall where they may.
And I think it would
Charles,
be, yes, yeah, go on.
Chris called on me, and I want to make sure I go on record in saying that, yes, I completely agree with him. You look, politics aside, administrations aside, from the time this deal came to light, we saw it, all the international exports, independent of people who, think tanks that are sitting in Germany, have went ahead and make the assessment on the quality of this contract. And all of them came out with the same result. It's a bad contract. And I fully agree with Chris. The new administration, it would be in their best interest, and not only in their best interest, but the country's best interest, to make sure they review that contract and get a better deal for Guyanese. Look, there is no question. If going forward is another question, how you approach these contracts going forward is equally important to the contract that was already signed. But the whole point is that Chris is right. Right now, you're a net polluter. If you think about the benefit, look, here's a separate issue that is attached to this. We're talking about 40% and 50% growth and all of this, right? Before long, Guyana, based on a per capita income level, is going to move completely out of all the developing and least developed and low developing and all that category, and they're going to go right up at the top in the middle income or high middle income. What that means is that you're going to lose concession financing like as fast as you're pumping the oil. And so it is important to make sure that you are getting the best benefit that you can get from these resources, not just from a rent perspective, how much money you're making, but also from an environmental protection, from a safety, from a local content perspective. So yes, no matter how you flip this coin, no matter when you flip it, and no matter who flipped this coin, the answer will be the same. What you want is the best for the Guyanese people. And if that means revisiting this contract, then yes, so be it.
And yeah, one of the points that was raised, if the GDP will skyrocket, and that can play also a positive effect in our credit rating. So we might be able to enhance our credit rating, hopefully, and that will open up additional capital that can come to our country as well. So it's a wheel within a wheel, and we hope that all play a part in it. I know Chris is one of my Democratic friends, and he's bashing our Republican stance. But the thing is, talking about the justice that recently died, she was, of course, one of the great ladies of America. And but here, whether it's a Republican or Democratic Senate, if the Democrat had a Democratic president, and that happened today, they would have gone ahead with the nomination. The Republicans have it, so you know what? It's both parties, the same thing. So we it's politics as usual. But gentlemen, let us move on to the budget.
I shouldn't let you get away with that. Look at what Mitch McConnell did, man. Come on, let's be reasonable. And Obama didn't fight and try to rile up the crowd and say, oh, if he loses, it has to be fraudulent. You have someone who heads the United States, who your own big leading newspapers call a thug.
Yeah, I know, but the politics here, Chris, as you know,
the threat to democracy in America is a threat to democracy in Guyana and everywhere else,
around the world. I agree. And the thing is, it's democracy is also at a crossroad here, as you know. The far left has taken the country for a ride, and so is the far right as well. So the middle ground.
The country for a ride?
Well, with all these things you're seeing in the streets of the United States, you know what? Let's get into that discussion another day. But it's
that's a discussion for a different day, Charles.
No, but but you know what? Let's move on in the budget.
You're talking about the squad. You're talking about AOC. They have not had.
No. I'm talking about
far left.
I'm talking about all.
Was Obama far left?
I'm talking about what's going on in the streets. I'm talking about the streets of New York after the death of Mr. Floyd Haynes, which, I mean, it's a difficult.
Not Floyd.
Not Floyd. George Floyd. Sorry, Floyd Haynes, if you're watching. Sorry about that. I'm George Floyd. But yeah,
and many others.
Yeah, I saw that video. I really believe in my heart that those police officers should be executed in a public place. What they did to that gentleman
You're going too far now.
is unconscionable. No, they're really. I saw the video. It's on social media. What they did to that guy is unpardonable. But it's God bless the dead. Gentlemen, let's talk about the budget. We need also to give credit to the PPP that they put together a budget within a month. I think in 2015, also the finance minister Winston Jordan put together a budget in a very short time as well. So kudos to these guys. Overall, Dan, what do you have to say about the budget that was presented?
Within the circumstances in which this budget was presented, I, being somebody who has been looking at the budget for the last 5 years with a fine-teeth comb, I am personally satisfied. I think the budget rightfully put attention to where I think the important issues are, which is addressing this COVID issue, but at the same time, reorienting the priorities in the budget. And I've said this repeatedly year after year after year. When you look at what the past administration was doing with the budget, I don't know who these expenditures were serving. It was certainly not the Guyanese people. It was as though they were serving the government, and I've documented that much. When you look at the measures that are part of this budget, I can't help but to see that what the budget is doing is to leave people with the most of their money that they make and let them spend it. Look, there's a fundamental principle in economics that says if you want to give somebody a gift, better you give them cash than give them an item. Why? Because when they have the cash, they spend it, and they spend it in a way that gives them the greater satisfaction. If you apply that simple concept at the level of the economy, it makes sense. The kinds of draconian tax measures that the past administration has placed, even if COVID had not existed, it would have continued to choke this economy slowly taking it down to a dangerous path. And again, I've said that much publicly. So overall, the level of spending, there is no question that the large majority of what is approved in the budget was already spent. There's no question about that. The debt that is necessary to fund this budget, that is also necessary within the circumstances. There is not a country on the planet right now that would not be debt financing their budgets. There's not a country because of the global situation. So the level of spendings, the reorientation of the budget and where they're prioritizing these fundings, in my mind, makes it a very good budget. And I'm not even touching on the fact that it was done within such a short time, and also with the fact that it did not touch any of the oil revenues that are sitting there. So that is a very high 25,000 feet view in the air in the way I feel about the budget. I think it's a very good budget.
Yeah, and I'm glad you mentioned that about the deficit financing, and we'll get into that later on. But Chris, I mean, when I listened to the Member of Parliament last week, and I listened to some of them, I couldn't watch all of them, but I think their presentation was so powerful on both sides. I think it's an opportunity for a Member of Parliament to stand up there and tell the Guyanese and the world that, hey, this is who I am, sell themselves as a really good public speaker. And I think on both sides of the divide, the parliamentarian did a great job. I think all of them did an excellent job in their presentation. But what is your overall take on the budget, Chris, without going into details?
Well, the budget was referred to as an emergency budget. Yet what you had were major policy statements on the entire direction. It is the kind of thing that you might have had if President Ali had gone to the parliament, addressed the nation and said, this is our agenda for the next 5 years. So once it was called an emergency budget, I think it went way beyond that. Danraj is, as he said, it's 25,000 feet in the air over the budget. I like to keep my feet planted on the ground. I think this budget, yes, it dealt with manifesto promises. And of course, as you know, when you're charged, you've been in politics long enough, when you're in politics and going for elections is one thing. When you look at the state of the economy, you say, you know what, I may need to adjust my promises, having regard to the reality that I'm confronting. I'm not sure. One doesn't need to say what one thinks about the budget. The person who presented the budget, we don't have a finance minister, and I think that's a grave oversight. I don't know if Mr. Singh knows why that is the case. It's the first time in the history of Guyana that we have not had a finance minister presenting a budget. And I think that's, the people needed some explanation. You talk about the speeches made in Parliament. A budget is essentially an economic document. And you know something? There is only, I believe, one single economist in the entire National Assembly. That cannot be good. You got lawyers like running through your ears and nose in the National Assembly. We have not had, in my view, a good, careful analysis of the financial implications. Now, we have a budget, and it shows you why we need to do some rethinking. What does the budget say? That we are going to grow 50-something%, and that in 2020, in fact, that we somehow grew by 54% or 40, something to that effect. Now, where is that? So our economic measures are bad. They're inappropriate. I think one of the things we have got to do, and I was glad to see some of the, I believe is Dr. Vinay Prasad, who said we have to do some baseline studies. You're telling me that if this is an emergency budget, what's the emergency we're facing? The pandemic. You have a serious problem in education. And when a child, and you know, Charles, you were quite right in congratulating the grade 6 people who did so well. When a child loses 6 months of education, when that child is anyway between 5 and 9, that's almost a permanent disability. That's the kind of emergency we're talking about. You are enthusiastic about this high deficit. Deficit has consequences. It's the largest deficit Guyana has ever had. Largest ever. By guess what? 150%. That's pretty serious. Now, not even in the days of Ashley Singh, who I thought was one of the best finance ministers this country has ever produced, did he go for that kind of deficit financing. We did not. One of the emergencies we face, that NIS, is a serious, serious matter we're facing. The word was not even used. So you know, you need a lot of time to talk about these things. Some of the tax measures. Why would you, if you were saying you want to fix the public health system, you're going to give the private sector complete tax exemption so that even the individuals don't have to pay? You know what I would do if I were a good doctor working at Jordan Hospital or in the public sector? I would say, look, this new measure is not for me. It's not for the public sector. You don't fix the public sector by helping the private sector exclusively. So a lot of the measures, you talk about some of the budget measures, and I don't know where Dan Raj got this thing about draconian tax measures. Look, personal taxes were reduced. Corporate taxes were reduced. What we had, and we had some serious increases in taxes that had not been increased for decades. But let me give you a couple examples, Charles.
Yeah, go on.
Some of the large increases were in respect of the legislation dealing with spirituous liquor. It's to tell people, tell shop owners, you can't serve drinks, alcohol to minors. You can't have fights in your place and you do nothing. You can't have false advertisements. Are you going to tell me that those increases that hadn't, there was one particular case since 1958 and the majority were 1992. Are you going to tell me on a social basis some of those increases were not justified? Yes, reduce those that you think were bad. We call ourselves a low carbon development strategy country, and then we import all kind of USI. Remember, we used to become the dumping ground for USIs. We can get back there. You bring half cars. Who do you think that's for? So the budget had some good measures, but I believe it was, the rushing was good. We had to get a budget. But it tried to do too much. It did not take the whole consequences. What will happen to our balance of payments? What will happen to inflation rate? None of those things. And you know, you had the unusual situation where the minister gave growth and inflation rate and all of those things within a range. I trust you're aware of that. He didn't say what it's going to be. He gives a range. Now, is it a weakness in our statistical base? And in which case, should we have looked at those things?
Chris,
yes.
If you don't mind us up there, and we'll continue discussion. But don't forget, I'm not the great deficit that you're talking about in this budget. The budget was broken down into two different parts. One was from January to September, and the other one from October to December. Now, most of the budget was already spent. So in a COVID environment where revenues were depleted basically because there was no revenue coming into the state. I mean, look at here in the United States. Congress passed it, how many, Dan Raj? 2 or 3 different packages, and now they're looking at $3 trillion package, which will blow up the American deficit. In this environment, even though it's 150%, as you said, isn't it essential that at least the people get some help that they really deserve? I mean, I'm just asking.
Oh, no, the questions are out. You know, the luxury of being a moderator is you can ask any question, loaded or uploaded. Of course, the people need help. Pensioners need help. The non-working mothers need help. And it's not to say that there are not good features in this budget. I'm simply saying that because we have not had, and I said that to an economist earlier today, I said, you know, it's disgraceful that you all have not even offered a comment on this budget. So let's look at some things. We have a deficit. Now, you said 9 and 3. That's not correct. It's 7, 2, and 3.
Okay.
Of course it is.
Yeah, it is 7, 2, and 3. I agree.
7.
Yeah.
So we did not have that baseline information. It was not there. When we look, so what happens? That deficit, Charles, is based on a 3-month reduction of some of these taxes. And as I said, there are some things that I liked about the budget. I think it was only natural that exports be zero rated. Guyana was the only country in the world where exports were not zero rated. I like the professional allowance. I like the person on lower income. But when you think of this, Charles, when you think that the pensions will be increased, not now, but from next year, when you think you will have a full year brunt of the reduction of the tax measures, all private schools, despite the exorbitant prices that they do charge, become tax-free. And as I said, if you understand taxation, you know the individuals ain't gonna pay any tax either. So we paying taxes for them, yeah? Where is the fairness? Where's the equity in that tax system? But the point I'm making is that you are looking now, as we look at 2021, we will have to have the full year impact of those tax reductions. And I want to make this point, and you people are in New York and wherever Dan Raj is in Florida, Sunshine State, no? You know, a lot of the, and I pointed this out to the politicians, a lot of the land in agriculture and especially rice, a lot of it is owned by non-resident persons. They engage in landlordism, right? They rent it out and they get so many bags of paddy for every acre of rice. I'm sure you know that. Now, who you think get the benefit of the reductions when instead we ought to have had a more careful examination? Like, for example, Blackbush, $2,000 an acre. That can be a hell of a cost. MMA, $17,500 an acre. So we needed and maybe the 2020 budget was not the place for it because we didn't have enough time. Though other persons should have been doing some analysis. I mean, everybody wasn't just fighting for elections. There was time for us to do lots of things. The PPP knew it had run. It should have had its budget team in place. So when you look at it, and the finance, the man who presented the budget said, this is for, he embraced the private sector. Never in the history, not even Peter DeGar. Look at the 95, like at the 65 and the 66 budget speeches. We've never had such an admittedly and avowedly pro-business budget as this 2020 budget. I didn't say that. Juan Edgehill, Bishop Juan Edgehill, is the one who said that, chap.
All right, Chris. I know Dan Raj want a lot of things to respond to, but Dan Raj, hold that discussion until we come back. Let's go to a short commercial break, and when we come back, I'll give you the floor. All right.
Remember to wash your hands constantly and always wear your mask. A friendly reminder from Globespan24x7 management and staff.
Cannot travel due to COVID? Then treat yourself or your loved one with a gift. Purchase it online, then let Travelspan Shop and Ship take care of the rest. Travelspan is now offering a shop and ship program to Guyana and Trinidad. Cheap rates plus tracking and multiple offices in Georgetown, West Coast Demerara, and Berbice to take care of your package. Treat yourself and ship your Christmas gifts early this year. In Guyana, 227-1701, and in New York, call 347-238-2201. That's 227-1701. And in New York, 347-238-2201. Let Travelspan and Globespan take care of your online shopping and shipping.
Looking for space to rent? We have space available for offices, apartments, and retails. We have 2 locations available on Lot 3A North Road, Georgetown, and Lot 55 South Public Road, Rose Hall Town. Contact us today for more information. You can contact 624-0692 or 337-4287.
Welcome back, and we want to thank our audience for staying up with us. This has been a very good discussion with no other than Chartered Accountant and Attorney at Law Christopher Ram and economist and financial consultant Dan Raj Singh. Dan, I know you listen a lot to what Chris said. Before you answer him, you would have been a great finance minister. You or Joel Bagwandin, you're 2 of the top economists in Guyana who have consistently talked about budgetary measures. Why are you not in the finance ministry as you answer the question about the budget?
Charles, I'm going to pretend as though I didn't hear that question, and I'm going to go to address the issue of substance. Look, you're putting me in a hard spot. At the end of the day, those are decisions for the government to make, and they're the one that run a campaign. They're the one who voters decided to put in charge of the state. That's decisions on their plate. Let me talk about what I know at this point in time. Chris, I was almost out of paper while writing while Chris is speaking. So you're going to bear with me a couple of things that I want to touch on that Chris mentioned. I want to start with the growth rate first of all. I completely agree with Chris that you have to have baseline assessment done if we're going to understand where this economy is going, where we're taking it from, what the situation is, and whether or not the spendings we're going to make, if they at all are going to be making an impact. In a private WhatsApp group that I'm on, where there's a lot of professionals and economists, I've made the argument over the years that with this oil economy coming on board, we should, for a period of about 5 years, maintain 2 series of our GDP assessment. One without this oil and gas added to it, and one with the oil and gas. And that transition period of 5 years would allow us to see what the economy outside of oil and how it is behaving, and how the economy with oil is behaving. And over that 5 years period, you would get a better sense of how you're transitioning and what those numbers look like. Look, you're talking about a 40-something% growth. Whether or not it materialized that amount of growth in 2020 or in 2021, at the end of the day, that is simply the value of the oil that we're selling. Anybody who understands basic economic accounting will tell you that. I've said this even in my writing, that is just the value of the oil. That has nothing, that is saying very little about what else is happening into the economy, in the household sector, the private sector, the forestry services, every other thing. So I agree with Chris that you need baseline assessment. You need those, and you need to get a good understanding going forward when you're spending these monies, what they're delivering, what's the impact that they're delivering. Whether or not those things could have been achieved in 2020, I would not agree with Chris. I think given where the nation was and what was happening in the 5 months before this budget, I think there's no way in God's good humour could have even anticipated that any of this would have been put in place. So I would expect some of this to start coming on stream in 2021. That's on the growth rate issue. This high deficit spending, Chris talked about the level of this deficit that we're looking at. But here is the question. Give me a public health crisis that have rocked the global economy, including Guyana, that is comparable to this one. There is none. The point that I'm making here is that what we're dealing with is a very, very uncommon event. And yes, in addition to the fact that you're facing a public health crisis of this nature, which has basically put the imagine you're driving, the economy was driving on 5th gear and it suddenly got into 4th gear to the point where for some months it was idle. What you have in addition to that, in my own assessment, is in addition to this crisis, you had 4 years of poor economic management. And while again the GDP numbers were keep showing that okay, the economy is growing by X and Y%, what was really happening at the end of at the community level was not that. It was a complete different story. The joblessness was there. In 2016 alone, for example, the only 2 broad sectors that grew were mining, and I think there was one other growing by 10%. So in my mind, you inherited a situation where not only are you rocked with a historic pandemic that is impacting the economy, you're inheriting an economy that was badly managed for years. So if you have to dip in to your debt to address this issue now, yes, I think it makes sense, because guess what? If you don't, you're probably not going to have an economy to talk about in 2 years from now or a year from now. Bear in mind also that while you're dipping into your debt as the largest debt portion of the budget that is debt financed, you have an economy that is also, again, for whatever it's worth, by virtue of your GDP change, is going to be growing at 40-something% to 50%, taking $70-something billion in debt. Again, within the circumstances, in my mind, makes sense. Here's the question I'm going to ask, however. What is the alternative? What would have been the alternative if you're not debt financing this? Well, you're going to print the money. We know there is consequence there too. So government they don't have an unlimited avenue of spendings here. You have very few choices and you have to make one. And sometimes the hard choices, you have to make it. Let me go off from this debt business now. Chris talked about some of the taxes, which I called draconian taxes before. You see, mathematics is a funny thing, and how we play with numbers, you have to be careful, and Chris knows this as much as anybody else. You lower the tax rate, yes. So on an individual basis, yeah, you can have a good talking point. You drop the tax rate from 25 to 20%, no problem. But when you add tax on basic utilities like water and electricity and taxing things like exports, what you're giving with one hand, you're taking back twice on the other hand. When you look at what the government did in the last couple of years, all the tax, the glories and the victories that they can mention and pinpoint, and Chris talked about some of them, yet at the end of the day, you raked in about $95 billion more in tax revenues. Now, that didn't come out of nowhere. It came from somewhere. It came from families' pocket. It came from small businesses. It came from some big businesses as well. So taxation, we must be very careful when we talk about it. Changing rate is one thing. But when you look at a macroeconomic view, if you are taking more out of taxes from the economy, and you're taking it and pumping it into the government coffers and using it how you feel, that is money that families don't have at their disposable income level. So when I made the point that what the budget did was to roll back some of those draconian measures, those are some of the measures that I'm talking about. Now, Chris mentioned also about some of the thing with rates, and he was talking, look, there's no question that some of these rates and fees that are on the books, they needed to be updated. They were talking about a world that none of us probably even know. Some of us do know. It made sense. But back in 2015, 2016, when the government decided to increase those rates, I would have expected at that time a more humane and gradual approach was done to increase those rates. But when you're increasing rates by 10,000% and 5,000%, it made no sense. Very little economic and fiscal sense. Now, rolling back some of those measures in my mind made sense. Okay, it allows people to keep more of the money, both of them at the business level and at the household level, and for them to use the money. And look, let me come off of the tangent a little bit just to mention another economic concept without boring our viewers. There is something that is called a multiplier. And that multiplier is different for the government and for a private person. If the government takes $1 from me and spend it, it would not have the same impact that if I had kept that money and spent it myself. So the private spendings multiplier is greater, which means the way you approach taxation is to make sure that you find that sweet spot to make sure people are spending the most money that they can spend from what they work, but at the same time, you're raising enough revenues to spend on the things that we need to spend on collectively. All right? Again, I believe this budget walked us back into that direction. Let me come to another issue, another point. You asked a very important question earlier, which is, when you go into 2021, how are we going to deal with financing? Are we going to how are we going to bridge that budget deficit? Here is my response to that. Whether or not you tap into oil revenues or whatever the case it is, here is my overall response to that. This is not just in Guyana. Across the world, governments are going to have to fundamentally rethink how they are raising and spending money, especially in the COVID situation. No longer will incremental or historical budgeting make sense. So not because Ministry of Education last year had $50 billion, and I'm using hypothetical numbers here, and this year they got $60 billion, means next year we're just going to dump $65 billion in them. What I think governments are going to realize very quickly, they're going to find themselves in a situation where they have to move to a situation where you're going to be doing value proposition budgeting. Whatever the technical term is, here is what it simply means. You're going to have to go back to that budget, go to those line items, go to those spending priorities, and assess whether or not this makes sense, whether or not it is the best way to achieve the objective that you're trying to achieve, and whether or not you are actually getting the return for it. Now, in that regard, I was pleased when I heard the president saying that one of the things he's concerned about is to make sure you have return for your money, you know, results oriented. That is yet to be seen, what systems will be put in place to make sure that the monies you're spending, you're getting a return for it. But again, I don't think any government across the world right now can think that they're going to go into budgeting the way it used to be done all along. It is going to have to change. Whether or not some of the oil monies are going to be spent, again, I can't speak for the government, but what I can say is this. At some point in time, monies that are sitting inside of that fund would have to be spent to address the issues and priorities that the people of Guyana has. And at some point, we're going to have to spend some of them. Hopefully, by the time the right mechanism and the right oversight and the right transparency provisions are put in place to make sure that those monies are spent in the right way and in the right manner. But at some point, they're going to have to be spent. So if you ask me again, come 2020, when this budget discussion is going to be having, and you're going to start to think about what we're going to spend and how we're going to spend it, all cards are on the deck. Again, this is my personal view, looking at this from a purely economic standpoint, because you can't come, sectors that you used to make money from prior to COVID would no longer probably be there. New sectors are going to give an opportunity. So you're going to have to fundamentally rethink that. As to what it would be, I don't know as yet, but certainly time will tell. Last point I'm going to mention.
Okay.
If you ask anybody about their position on this budget, you're going to hear one of two answers. More than likely, it either did too much or it either did too little, right? And that's understandable, because everybody comes with a perspective. Everybody sees the same document in a different way. They see the priorities of the state and themselves and in their communities differently. But here's my point, the last point I'm going to make. It was very striking to me to see people who disagreed with this budget on the notion that is a private sector budget, whatever they describe that to me. Look, how long have we been talking about the private sector is the engine for growth in a market-based economy? How long have we been talking about it? And suddenly you have a budget where it is capturing a private sector budget, and suddenly that becomes a bad thing? I don't understand how you reconcile those two. In my mind, if the budget is focused on stimulating the private sector within the economic situation that we're facing right now, that makes absolute sense. Whether it goes too much or too far or doesn't do too much, we can have that discussion. But if it is oriented towards gearing and stimulating the private sector, in my mind, that makes absolute sense.
Ladies and gentlemen, the discussion, I know, Chris, 1 second, you'll come in. The discussion has been really, really good so far, and I like the discussion on this budget. But before you come in, Chris, Anuraj, what you're saying is that we want to go back to what a zero-based budgeting, because right now it's more incremental budgeting. So it's a zero-based approach you're looking at?
I think it would be a blend between zero-based and value proposition.
Okay.
It has to. But what we certainly have to do, we'll have to move away from the incremental and historical budgeting practice, which is, okay, here is a line item, just increase it by 3-4%, whatever that means, and we'll just keep it on him. We can't do, I don't think, in my humble opinion, we can afford to do that anymore.
Beautifully put. Chris, I know you got a lot of things to respond to, but shouldn't as you also agree, you're in the private sector, shouldn't the private sector given adequate recognition in any budget that is presented? Are we saying that this is too much overboard to the private sector now? In your response?
I didn't say that. It's the person who presented the budget. Now, I don't have Mr. Singh's youth. I don't have the enthusiasm. I can't raise my voice to the extent to which I would like him to give me 2 examples of where there were 10,000% increase in taxation, and give me 2 examples where there were 5,000. Just 2 examples each.
Chris,
but, you know, I am a bookkeeper.
Chris, let me
finish.
Okay,
I always allow people to finish. We talk about the multiplier. Now, I'm a bookkeeper. I'm not an economist. I have been writing about budgets for 30 years. In Grenada, I participated in the preparation of budgets for 4 years. So I'm not a stranger to budgets, but I'm not an economist. I do know, however, I did teach public finance as well. I do know as well, when you're talking about multiplier, you have to think of the nature of the economy that you're talking about. If your economic space is, say, a big economy like the United States, now the multiplier works a lot within the system. In our case, we have the importers are also the exporters. Take some of the Chinese businesses and almost every one of our major sector. Canadians in gold, Chinese in forestry, Americans in oil. Now, when you have multiplier works well, and it's a reliable indicator, when the economy is so you get the rapid turnover. What happens, and we did not touch on the balance of payment deficit. Now, when you, I believe in pro-poor growth. All of those who believe in the trickle-down economics, they can go back to Reagan and Thatcher. I have no problem. That is where it started. That's where we seem to be getting back. I believe in pro-poor growth. We said, for example, in Raman Mukherjee Focus 2020, we have to fix the problems of our village communities that have been robbed of their self-sufficiency. I'll tell you, it pains me, Charles, when I go into these communities and I see one single shop owned by Chinese nationals and it practically sells everything. You've destroyed the village economy. No, I'm not talking about the PPP, I'm talking the PNC and the PPP. We have ignored our communities. I've called for the rebuilding of places like Plastic City or Boys Town. And somebody from Burby said, man, like you don't know Burby as well. You didn't name some of those societies. We have some serious, I wouldn't say pockets. I would say streams of poverty. And we have to deal with those. This is why the events on the East Coast and West Coast of Berbice, they were engineered and they were manipulated by Granger and Harmon. But if you have a set of people who feel this is not for me, I'll have to wait until something trickles down, then you're creating that environment where you get social instability. Now, and it's very unfortunate, so often we talk about race, we explain everything, or we excuse everything on race. Sometimes it's economic, but it because our population is so easily distinguishable. And after the 60s, you had almost a kind of partitioning. So you've got places like Bath, one ethnicity, you've got Linden, one, and that's our society. I believe we need to move away. And you will recall, Charles, I'm sure Mr. Singh does as well. Greenwich and Hoyt and Greenwich brought the economic recovery program after the failed policies of self-sufficiency from Burnham. It recognized that this is going to have serious dislocating effects on the economy. And so what did we have? We had people, you were here, we had places like SIMAP and all these so-called shelters to capture the people who dropped out of the economy. So I think instead of our just taking either for or against, and that's why I said I don't share your view about the parliamentary debate, because I didn't think it was very fruitful. And I don't think with the winner take all that you're going to see much change, because as you know, they went into the Committee of Supplies where they discuss the expenses. And incredibly, we don't discuss income. I'm assuming you were aware of that. In the Committee of Supply, income doesn't get into it. The government controls it. So I think we are on a per capita basis, if you were to measure wealth, we are well up there. But if you look at what we're getting out of it, now you raise the question of the fund. People need to read the Natural Resources Fund Act. It provides for a mechanism, a logical mechanism. The money first goes into the Natural Resource Fund, and there's a mechanism for moving funds from the Natural Resource Fund into the budget. So it's not that we must shut it out or we must shut it in. But what I want to point out, whilst yes, we have income from oil, and it is not only the royalty or the profit share, because we collect lots of withholding tax. If you were to look at the financial statements, lots of withholding tax. So there is a lot of oil money in the budget. But what you also have to look, and I would advise people, go to volume 1, where you have the capital expenditure program, and also look at the subsidies in volume 1. And you will see, to manage an oil economy, you have to spend a lot of money. What we have, our EPA, for example, is almost, I don't want to use distracted, but it's single focus with oil. And so, thankfully, the GGMC recently brought some action against people who are abusing the rivers in the name of gold mining. So once we talk of the revenue side, we have to talk of the expenditure side as well.
And that's thanks, Chris. And that's
costing a lot of money.
And that's the discussion we're having tonight, in that when an accountant discussing budget with an economist, there is always that disparity, because accountants look at the bottom line, and sometimes we wonder, why does economists think that way when it doesn't make sense to us as accountant? But you know what? That's the way the budget operates.
I wasn't talking bottom line. I was talking the economic principle of deficit financing and how far do you take it.
That's correct. So it's
in the context of an emergency budget. That's all I'm talking. Me and I will win over.
all right. All right. So, gentlemen, why don't we take the next 20 minutes or so? Let's talk about some of the real issues in the budget. And Chris, you made a really valid point there. Why isn't revenue also discussed in the budget and only expenses? And that's a serious point, that we just accept the government projection and without going to the details of it. So why don't we talk about some of the specifics in the budget now? Danraj, you want to start, or Chris can start it?
I don't have a problem start, but I want to comment on 2 or 3 things that Chris talked about before I get into respond to your question. Chris talked about pro-poor policies, right? Here's the thing. There's an entire school of thought that also show you that pro-poor policies are sometimes very poor policies. Again, you have to make sure, it goes back to one of the very things he talked about at the beginning, which is baselines assessment. In whatever name you call this, whether you take a mixture of liberal policy, heterodox policy, pro-poor policy, however you decide, the point of the matter is this: you have got to have a good grasp of what the situation is that you are trying to resolve, what the policy goal and the objective is or are, and you've got to make sure you design, whether it's your budget policy, whether it's social policy, whatever it is, you're designing it to make sure that you are going to achieve that outcome. On the side, here's a problem that I have with our entire system that I hope in years to come we're going to address. We don't do any post-evaluation, post-policy evaluation or spending evaluation. So we never know whether or not we achieve anything out of the money that was spent. So that is something we're going to have to look at going forward. So on the issue of this pro-poor policies, my caution there is pro-poor policies sometimes are very poor policies. And you have to be very careful what you're designing and what you're trying to achieve. The other thing about the multiplier that I was mentioning to Chris before, which is what he came into, is again, yes, your multiplier in your economy, which is the rate at which your money is going to pass on and how much impact it's going to create, depends on how much people in the economy, whether you're only able to spend on a cash basis or you can spend on credit, all the different networks, and the more activities, the more impact you can get. That is true. But regardless of what the situation is, $1 spent in the hand of a private person when they get their income and they spend that money creates more impact than when you pass it to the government and the government spends it. This is why there is something that is called optimal taxation. Yeah, beyond a certain point, taking $1 more from the public doesn't bring a benefit. It brings a cost. All right, so you've got to find that point, what that point is. Now, Chris asked about, he opened his session asking about this 10,000 and 5,000%. And I don't have that with me here, but I promise you, you're going to get an email from me with that exact number, because I've looked at those measures when they were rolled out in 2016, and I did the calculation myself. And some of them, yes, grew by 10,000%, some by 5,000. So that's all I'm going to say for now. I'm going to provide that information to you, Chris. The other thing I want to mention, here, Charles, is this. When we try to, here is a problem even some of my own economist friend makes when we talk about economics in a country like Guyana. We forget sometimes that Guyana is a small economy, very small, and there is problems that comes with that. Let me give you one simple statistic and see if you can wrap your head around what this means. What is the size of our GDP right now? Leaving the oil business aside. Roughly at current prices, about 600 billion, 660, I think they're about. Yeah. What is the size of the government budget? 320 billion. Yeah. This government budget is roughly half the size of the economy. When you have a country where the budget represents so much of what happens, what you hoped for is that at the end of the day, those spendings are tailored towards the private economy. Because over the longer period in time, development and great development, they come by when you're able to use those funding to stimulate the private economy. And I know sometimes it's hard for us to even have this conversation because we use those terms and we throw them around so much on a daily basis that sometimes it means nothing. But the point is, you have to equip the private economy, which is the household sector and the business economy, to grow. At some point,
Right.
your budget have to be able to be way less than half of the GDP.
But
right?
then, what is in the budget now for 2020 that goes towards that? What you're talking about? What are some of the things in the budget specific to that?
So for and we have that question has so much. I hope you have time for me and Chris to keep.
Yeah, talking. I know. It's quite a bit.
With you. No, there's a couple of things which I think takes us in that direction. And the first one, I think it is this rolling back on this taxes on export. Never understood the logic of that when it was put in place. Still don't, and I'm glad you move it out. But here's one other thing that I think, and I can call things about the education and health and all of that, and I will say it sounds good. But for me, here is something that I think it's going in that direction, and whether we follow through on these policies is a different thing. The spendings that we're putting on ICT, $5-point-something billion we're putting towards ICT, including as a policy priority, liberalization of the sector. I've said this in the past, 5-10 years to come, if we deliver on those two things, we might look back and see that that was one of the most significant policy decision we have made in the past decades. And why do I say that? I believe the world we're going to inherit after COVID-19 is going to be dependent significantly on technology. 2, much of Guyana, we have missed all the revolutions that have gone by. We're already behind on the technological revolution. And simply liberalizing that sector and putting information into the hands of people and connecting them to the global economy, private enterprise will thrive. Governments don't have to sit down and think about what to create. The people will create that for themselves. And this is one of those structural things that I'm talking about, where you're not going to see again tomorrow or the next year. But over the long period, you're going to see this materialize if we hold true to that policy priority. So liberalizing that sector and putting the access to the e-commerce and the global economy. One other thing that I think goes very much so in this direction. All of history and all of economic history and development history have shown that where goods and services go, people go. Where people go, goods and services go. That sometimes economists refer to as a bicausality. It runs both ways. We have to have a better physical infrastructure in that country. Road networks, a combination of road networks, rail, highways, if we have to invest in them, proper seaports. If you have a good multimodal transportation system to move people, goods, and services, in addition to the technology and the information that you're giving to people, those two things are going to lay the foundation for building a modern economy over time. You're not, and I remember what I said, you're not going to see that gain tomorrow. You're going to see it over the longer period of time.
And you think, Danraj, that this budget has laid a foundation for that?
And I do think that. I do absolutely think that.
Okay.
At the least, the policy intention is there. They're clearly stated. The policy's intentions are there. Now, let me give you the caution before you go to Chris, because I know he's going to tear this to pieces. The difference between having those expectations and having those vision and realizing them is administration and implementation. And so it goes back to the point we're making. We're going to have to start to get into a system where when we spend money, some sort of post-spending evaluation is done to see whether we have achieved the outcome that we wanted. Did it deliver a benefit? Should we change the way we're doing things? So a lot of the success of these policies are going to be dependent on the administrative and implementation setup that we have. And that goes squarely back to the kinds of qualities and export that you have in the public sector. So
thank you. Thank you, Dan. Chris, in responding and saying what's in the budget to leap us forward. I mean, you know it, Chris, you interview people for jobs, and the way people present themselves, you can decide immediately if that person fit for this job or not. When people come to our country and they see they come to an airport, they look at the parking lot and it's a crazy parking lot. They drive out of Timeri and you come to East Bank that is so dilapidated and it's all these bushes around. They say, what kind of poor ass country this is? So don't we have to transform fundamentally our country? So when people come in, they say, this country is serious. Isn't this budget in that direction, put us in that direction? And give us anything in the budget you think put us in that direction.
Look, you know why I am a bit cynical and cautious? I've heard all this said before by both PPP and PNC governments. All of this about what liberalization of the telecommunications sector will do, what liberalization and lowering of tax rates will do. Well, you know what some of it has done? It has widened the gap between the rich and the poor, and it has built up a low income economy. Look, you know what is the minimum wage, and the government did not even go through with what the Minister of Labor said the private sector we would have for the private sector minimum wage, $60,000. We don't even have that. That's why people are not working. It makes no sense. Now, you can say that if you pay more and you have an open economy, where the money gonna go? Which is why all I'm calling for is a balanced economy, you know. We need private sector. I am in the private sector. But, you know, and it's good to talk about these shibboleths, so pro-poor policies can be very poor. Well, you know what is even worse? Pro-rich policies that make people poor. That is worse. And we have lots of that. And I don't think Dan and I are really disagreeing, you know.
Yeah.
But think about it. Charles, what is it that drove you out of this country? Dan Raj, what is it? All the people you've met. We have got to start looking. If you look at our budget, you're paying so much in unproductive wages. The first duty of a government, well, probably two. One, to protect territorial. But first one, in my view, is to protect its citizens. It struck me on the day of the budget, while Bishop Edgehill was talking about the duty of the government to protect people, people could not pass the corridor on West Coast, Barbies, because we are spending money. We somehow think that spending money results in policies. And Dara, don't forget, we have under the Audit Act, value for money auditing. That is whatever word we want to call value proposition. That's all it is. You know, these are nice fancy terms. Like Charles, well, you're much younger than me, but we used to know MBO's management by objective. Now you're all kind of fancy gibberish. The fact is, lots of what we have seen, what we're hearing, we heard in the past. In fact, I thought it was funny that this government was being accused. And if you look at the budgets every damn year, the budgets which got the same structure. There is no fresh thinking about the budget. What are some of the issues we have? We have to deal with this question of poverty. Because, okay, we're spending all this money to make your airport nice for foreigners. How many Guyanese can even afford to go to the airport? What is it we want them to come here and do? This budget allows people to export logs. In this day and age, you're talking about exporting logs, and who you think doing most of it? Who you really think doing most of it, partner? You should go down the Linden Suzdike Highway or the East Bank Highway up to by Land of Canaan, and you'll see where it is. So when you look at our financial plan, we have a lot of money being used on labor that is not productive. It's better we convert that labor into productive labor. We've got a lot of police. And remember, Gaston loves to mention this. Our police doing ceremonial work and lining the thing and the president passing. Get them to do serious crime work. Why shouldn't the court, why shouldn't the parliament have its own kind of people? The court has its own people. We are misusing resources. And you know, Dan, be careful. in celebrating this budget, you were saying, if forget the 723, you are saying the PNC budget was good then. So we got to be careful about that. How much,
all right, gentlemen.
That kind of analysis was not done. How much we know for the new ministries, how much money is being spent. But lots of the older ministries, it's all been put in a pot. And so what I think is going to happen, the true measure will come in budget 2021. The process for which I dare say ought to have begun on July 1. That process should already have begun.
Thanks, Chris. And
then we will know.
And I hope that you are part of that budget preparation team. So because you exactly, and I hope by which time Dan Raj or Joel is appointed our minister, so at least we can work together. Now I think one of the audit of the audit department, maybe one of their functions should be to do a cost benefit analysis within every ministry to see how well our money was spent. Maybe that might be an option they need to look at. Gentlemen, we got to wrap up now, but in closing, I want you to address this issue of the minister saying today that $95 million will be used to purchase new vehicles in this budget. I mean, is that value for money? I mean, knowing that we're having this huge deficit and part of our spending is 95, almost 100 million in new vehicles. So gentlemen, in closing, give your comment on that if you want to, and tell us anything that you might want to tell us at this point. Dan Raj, we can start with you.
So, Charles, I want to go back quickly on something that Chris said, and I think he said it quite correctly, that there's very little disagreement here in what we want. And I think broadly we're pushing for the same kinds of things. We want budgets to be reflective of public priorities and public needs. We want budgets to be forward looking and thinking. You want them to not just, as like I said before, continue to absorb what was and just keep adding on something to them. We'll have to think about restructuring and reorienting. And again, at the risk of like Chris wanted to not sound that I'm praising the budget too much, the point that when I look at what was delivered and within the time and within the circumstances, he said it best again at the end, which is I think much of what he has discussed and some of the things that he is looking for is what I would look for in 2021. Because then for me, the time would have allowed, and hopefully the systems will be put in place to start putting those planning and those kinds of preparations in place. Now, some of the issues that Chris talked about as well, which is, you know, in the long period, when you look at economic development from a very long period, institutions have to change to accommodate a new growth pattern. Culture has to change. The way we manage and approach management has to change. Now, they don't have to change simply because they're the worst or we need to change them. They need to change as the economy changes and as time demands and requires different of us. So I hear Chris when he says that he has heard these things before. I have no doubt he has. And clearly, if I was sitting in his shoe, I probably would have had the same view that we've heard this time and again, why haven't we realized it? Well, here is what I can say. We're hearing it here again, and I can only hope that the policymakers are going to take steps, even some amount of it, if not all of it, to get us closer in that direction. Because economies they don't come. And he's right. You can believe in trickle-down economics if you want, but you could wait from now until February and you're going to sit down right there and nothing would fall from above. Great economies are built. There is something that is called place-making. It's a fundamental principle in urban planning. You look at what the environment and the community you want and what you want to build, how you want to live, what quality of life you want there, and you invest to get those things in return. So I believe that if we as a country and the policymakers are able to move in that direction, over time we will see that materializing. Of course, I can't say for sure because we'll have to wait. That would be the only yardstick of success, is what we actually got when the benefit of time. So again, within the time frame that Budget 2020 was presented, I believe those emergency measures that were put in place, they ought to be. Yes, there are other things that could have been included, and I can give a list of those things that I think, but in my own personal assessment, it would have been somewhat overly optimistic given the constraint and given the time in which the budget was prepared and had to be put into the assembly. So that's much of what I would say on that issue.
Thank you. Then, Chris, in closing.
Well, I think what we have failed to address is the size of government. And I put that in the context of your saying we're going to spend $95 million to purchase new vehicles. What are we doing this for? Who is it going to serve? We have moved personal emoluments from $44 billion in 2015 to $75 billion in 2020. We've got the largest, the PNC, the APNU OFC had the largest number of ministers ever. But the PPP Civic is getting close there. When you add all the parliamentary secretaries and all of these things, we have a bloated Europe. We have systems. We haven't done, very little money has been put for the Commissioner of Information. Unless we get, you can talk and you mentioned something, but we do have value for money audit. The audit office is trained to do that. That's what it ought to do. The Parliament, if we are serious, Clive Thomas made this point years and years ago. Parliament must have its own budget office. It must do an independent evaluation of the budget. We don't have that. So when we defend or we attack, we don't know enough. Certainly, I would say when we defend, because we don't know some of the things that have gone. But until we can do, when you look, as I said, the size of government, Charles, at the same time you're saying we want a private sector. Jagan said lean and clean. I simply say give me an efficient and accountable and transparent government, and I think we can cut things. We don't have security, basic problems. You have the Lusignan prison. Kemal Ramjatan's legacy to this country is a most explosive situation. So you can't condemn the people. The government, I think they did a reasonably good job. But that's what they're there for. That's what they're there for. They said we're going to do it. So then don't say, time was short for us to do it. Since after March 2nd, I said, we should have had our transition team and they should have been working. This budget is not after not after August 2nd. But I would like to see a revamping of the budget. I'd like to see a parliamentary budget office that critically evaluates the budget. I would like to see a revenue, something of income. I would like to see more devolution of revenue raising in this country. There is no reason why Region 6 or Region 10 can't impose some of their own taxes. But you see, this whole thing is still winner take all. There was no consultation on this budget. Make how short the period. I think you should consult. There was time you could still be talking whilst you have your technical number crunchers. And the Ministry of Finance has a good set of people. But I think things could have been done differently. I think we might have had different results, but let's leave it for now. Let us see what happens in the 2021
budget. And ladies and
That would
gentlemen,
be the ultimate news.
I want to thank you so much for staying up with us and for watching the program tonight. We want to thank Nohar Singh for giving us this platform and to Devin for carrying us through. Special thanks to our two guests, Mr. Dhanraj Singh and Mr. Christopher Ram. Gentlemen, the time ran out so fast. The discussion was really good. I hope you can come back sometime so we can continue some of these discussions. And we hope that the government do listen or do watch the program so that they can at least listen and see if they can tweak their policies. And I think what Dhanraj said, the policy of the government will, determine the future of our country. And I think they're in the right direction, but I think they need help, and they must understand that they're not an island on their own. They need all the help available. And these two gentlemen are two of our outstanding sons of Guyana. There's so much more in our country and overseas that can contribute to the development of our country. So again, gentlemen, thank you so much for spending the evening with us. And to our audience out there, we want to thank you so much, and good night. God bless Guyana. Take care.